Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Social Studies Online. My name is Eden Cho. I'm a museum educator at the National Museum of American History. Today's topic on the presidency should be exciting after such a historic day yesterday. I'm personally thrilled in who our guests are today, because if you're subscribed to our National Museum of American History YouTube channel, not this one is the Smithsonian Education, our guests today should be familiar faces. So please ask any questions you may have during our time here by commenting in the chat box. Our guests will answer them live. We do ask that you keep your personal information private. There's a lot to cover when talking about the presidency, so let's get started. I'm going to turn over the introductions to our host today, Orlando Serrano.
All right, good morning, everybody. Thank you for being with us for these 30 minutes of conversation about the presidency. And as you can see on the tile that we have in front of you, we've got a couple of guests today, and we're going to have a conversation with Lisa Kathleen first and then Bethany. So Lisa Kathleen, can you please introduce yourself beyond your name? You know, what is it that you do at the museum? How long have you been there? How did you end up at American History?
Oh gosh, well, I'm a curator of political history here at the National Museum of American History, and I've been here for 30 years now. I've recently realized. Started as a museum technician, as an intern, and then a museum technician, and have been here ever since, sort of increasing the breadth and the scope of what I do, which is the fun thing about the museum. And I have curated exhibits on everything from George Washington to women's suffrage to the first ladies. So the presidency and the presidency, the exhibit we put up in 2000 was a work of blood, sweat, and tears for me. So this is a wonderful topic to discuss with all of y'all.
Wonderful. Now, what are some of the projects that you're working on currently, so folks can know what's coming down the pipeline?
Well, we finished in March, and it's still up. When we reopen, you can see it. An exhibit called Creating Icons: How We Remember Women's Suffrage. And it looks at some of the people we don't remember and how the suffrage fight and the struggle and the schisms within it reverberate into modern women's activism. So what I'm going to be doing next is continuing those threads, to tug on those threads and look at how activism moves and women in politics move from the period of suffrage to the Equal Rights Amendment, which will have its 100th anniversary in 2023.
Very cool. And so at this point, Eden, I'm gonna ask Eden for a favor. If she could put in the chat, as she usually does, information that some of the information that comes up, so folks who are joining us later on can, at their own pace and leisure, see some of the resources that we'll be talking about. All right, Lisa Kathleen, thank you for that introduction to yourself and to your work. And now I'm gonna ask you for an introduction to the particular collection of artifacts that you brought together today. Can you please share a little bit about your thinking behind it and how you conceptualize the presidency and putting these objects together?
Sure. When I was, we were going to pull 4 to 5 objects. And so you try to think about, which ones do we have a picture of and which are interesting objects that we can really talk about. And what I started thinking about is it's not as much, of course, it's always a president does something, and here's an object that represents what the president does. But, what the president is doing all of the time is the president is interacting with the public. People who elected him, the people who did not vote for him, for whom now he is the president of the United States. And so all of the objects represent the president trying to affect change, or the president trying to communicate, or the president trying to give an example, or the president trying to work on behalf of the people. And that's what I found interesting about them, because at its core, what we've elected a president to do is to work on our behalf. They're serious when they say they are a civil servant.
Yeah, thank you for walking us through your thought process there. And it's a really great way to think about this office and the position as someone who's being elected to work with and on behalf of a group of folks. And with that in mind, we're going to turn to our first artifact. And can you please share a little bit about this here. So we've got some press passes. And for folks who maybe aren't familiar with Learning Lab, I'm going to walk you through a couple of tips, and then we'll hand it off to Lisa Kathleen. So anytime you see a paperclip, that will be some more information. The I button is the general overview of the topic. If you happen to like this object and want to add it to your own collection, you can heart it. And you can also add it that way. But sorry, quick overview so that we can get that out of the way. Lisa Kathleen, can you share a little bit about the press passes here?
These are 3 press passes, and they belonged to Helen Thomas. And Helen Thomas was the unofficial dean of the White House Press Corps. And it said that she managed to get under the skin of every president from from John Kennedy to Barack Obama, and certainly their press secretaries. And we use them in the Presidency and exhibit in a section called the Limits of Power. And what it looks at are the checks and balances on the power of a president. And part of the way that we, through branches of government and as independent people, influence the presidency. And of course, one of those checks on the presidency is the press corps. And its job is to ask questions, to find truthful information, and to disseminate it to the American people so that they can assess what a presidency is doing, whether they think it's working well, and if they have questions that they want to put to the president. So the press really acts as our eyes and ears on the president. When the system is working properly, that's what they do. And of course, press passes are issued to each individual. There's a standard one for the White House, and then there's special press passes for different events. And Helen Thomas covered, she died in 2013, so she covered just a range of presidents and events, and was known for asking very pointed questions and for being tenacious about getting information for the public.
So as I'm hearing you, I want to make sure and sort of make sure our listeners and viewers understand as well. These objects really get at the interaction that the president has with the public, and being held accountable to and responding to the needs of the public outside the legislative branch. Is that accurate?
That is what we use for in the exhibit. This coupled with protest and people's direct responses to the presidency is really how a president is held accountable almost directly to the people.
And I have a quick follow-up question on Helen Thomas. You said she was the unofficial dean of the, can you say a little bit about how that came about?
Well, really, it's just, she has this long-lasting service. And so part of this is about longevity. Okay. And part of it is about the stature that she built within the members of the press corps, that she was a mentor, guiding light, an example to follow, and someone who really led the way on asking questions. She gets the first question. She has a seat in the first row. No one ever dared sit in Helen's seat. And although you can sit anywhere you want, but nobody sat in Helen's chair. And she gets the first question. So she's the lead off. So she's the one that's going to make that first foray into what the press secretary has announced for the day and what they want to ask about it.
Interesting. So Helen set the tone for the day.
Helen set a lot of the tone.
Okay. All right, we're going to move on to our next artifact here. And as you can see here by the description, we're looking at a solar thermal panel. And Lisa, I think I'm going to just hand it off to you right away. How does this object represent, the president's interaction with the people?
Well, this solar panel is from the Carter White House, and it was put on the roof in 1979, and it's used to heat water, not to generate heat for the building, but to heat water for use in the White House. And when President Carter had it installed, he was really trying to, the country had been going through an energy crisis. So 1977 is the time that Carter is encouraging everyone to wear sweaters and turn your thermostat down to 65, save energy. So it's really this early version of, early conservation. Mm-hmm. We think about global warming and everything now. This is when it starts hitting the government's radar. And he's trying to set an example. and encourage everyone in the country. Look, the White House is using solar. You can use solar. You can find ways to conserve. Didn't really catch on. We weren't as a nation as attuned yet to these issues. Right then, people were concerned because energy prices were going up. But as soon as they started to come down again, people were a little less inclined to try and use conservation measures in their own lives. And then during the Reagan administration, the solar panels were actually taken off of the roof. New solar panels have since been installed in the Bush White House, and there are solar panels on the roof now.
You know, that's really interesting as a way in which President Carter tried to model changes that we can do in our everyday lives. And it's really funny, the longevity of the idea of turning down your thermostat. And Eden and I have had many conversations about trying to stay warm in our cold houses. And, you know, what is and my partner and I the other day were like, wait, what is it? Is it 64, 65? What's the temperature we're supposed to set it at? So it stuck around, you know? And it's interesting how it came back, the idea of putting the panels back on during the Bush administration. All right, so we've got being held accountable by the press, you know, interacting with the people that way. We've got modeling some changes that we can take in our everyday lives. Let's move on to our next object here. Go ahead.
This is the Emancipation Proclamation inkstand. And this is the ink, and it's ink wells welded to a base. And it was used by Abraham Lincoln when he drafted the Emancipation Proclamation. And it of course, is the 1862, you know, we hear about executive orders. This was an executive order that was enacted on January 1st, 1863. And he wrote it to give freedom to the enslaved people in the Confederacy, to hasten the end of the Civil War and to start the abolition of slavery, because once it was abolished in rebelling territories, that would follow in the northern territories. It couldn't, the loyalist territories, it wouldn't sustain if it was abolished in the South. And there's a wonderful story to this. It's that this was actually belonged to Major Eckert of the telegraph office, and this was the inkstand that was on his desk. Doesn't really look like government issue to me, but this was what was on his desk. And Lincoln, of course, we all know the stories about Lincoln going to the telegraph office every day because the military wouldn't string wires to the White House, so he'd have to go to the telegraph office to get the war information. And there are all the apocryphal stories about how he would spend his time joking with people there and waiting for messages to come in. And Major Eckert talked about the summer of 1862 when Lincoln wasn't joking and wasn't talking, and he asked to use the major's desk. And he would sit and write. Every day he would sit and write. And the major was curious, but trepidatious about asking the president of the United States what he was doing. So he eventually made bold to ask the president what he was working on. And Lincoln told him that he was working on a document that, if successful, would free the slaves of the South and would hasten the end of the war. And he said that if he were remembered in history, it would be for this, and his whole soul was in it. Now, I like it for a variety of reasons. And one is obviously what it wrought, that it created the Emancipation Proclamation. It represents that and the end of slavery. But it also represents, to me, how a president works through a change and change their minds when trying to strive to do the right thing for the people they represent. Because Lincoln, when he came into the White House, when the war started, Lincoln himself didn't believe in slavery, but he didn't side with the abolitionists. He hoped that slavery would end organically, or that they could pressure slavery into ending, but he wasn't ready to make a hard end to slavery. And as they moved into 1862, as the war went on, he began to see that this was going to be necessary, that this was the step he had to take. It was the step he had to take for the soldiers fighting the war. It was the step he had to take for the enslaved people of the South. It was the step he had to take for the people in the North and to end their relationship with slavery, and to assist to finally assist the abolitionists. So to me, it really represents a president struggling with opinions he comes in with, how the activities, how real world life begins to affect and change what he's thinking, and how they change their mind, how they change their policies, and how they find courage to do something that they know will be unpopular in some segments of society. Now, while he's praised by abolitionists, pro-slavery unionists are not going to be accepting of this, and Southern supporters of the Union won't be sympathetic either. He makes a decision that this is what he's going to fight for, this is what he's going to push through, and he's going to have to bring everyone along with him. And
so thank you, Lisa Kathleen. There are a few things that sort of stand out. Thank you for that very sort of well thought out explanation of the object and why what it can signify, right? And so some of the things that stand out are the idea that a president is not inhabiting this office in isolation, that the president should have a relationship with what is going on in the world, and that in many regards, Lincoln's change of mind was a direct result of that. But secondly, for folks out there, the idea of pro-slavery unionists, look that up. That's some research for y'all to do there. That was very subtly thrown in, but oftentimes, we don't think about that when we're learning about this moment of history in our country. But that's a great explanation of the importance of this particular artifact. All right, Liz Kathleen, we're going to do two more. And for these last two, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions to, for folks who are coming into an artifact either in their classrooms or if they go to a museum, ways that they can approach visual text and sort of analyze it a little bit wherever they go. So we're going to do something called See, Think, Wonder. And as you answer the questions, if you could just give us the information about these particular objects. So the first one is, what do we see here when we look at this object, and what do we think about? What drew you to this object with those two questions?
This is a fireside. It's obviously an NBC microphone. This is NBC radio, and it is from the Fireside Chats. So this is a microphone that would have been used by FDR. There would have been a bank of them on his desk when he gave one of the 30 fireside chats that happened between 1933 and 1940. And one of the things that's interesting when you look at it, that's a weird base, isn't it? It's an odd decorative base. And I've always wondered, is this a base that wouldn't have been the base that was originally on that microphone? Was it screwed into a place on the desk? Was it screwed into something that's a little more utilitarian? Because that's a very interesting base for that microphone to have. It doesn't seem to go with the rest of the microphone, does it? So sort of have to start wondering, where did it come from? What was it put together with? And does that mean that this microphone was moved and used in different places? Would have been used in a variety of fireside chats, and those didn't all stay on his desk all of that time.
Interesting. And so thank you. Yeah, I had not wondered that until you brought it up.
It's more obvious when you have to pick it up.
Yeah, well, and because in thinking about the fireside chats, I wondered, how these fireside chats were received, and so if you could please say a little bit more about the purpose of these chats. What was FDR thinking? How was this a shift in? We started off this conversation with the press passes, and it feels like we're sort of coming back to that here. How did these chats alter the relationship of the presidency with the general public?
Well, this is a way for the president to communicate directly with the public, because most homes have a radio or a place where they can gather that has a radio. And FDR started these, it's really just about a week after he's sworn in for his first term as president. And of course, the country is suffering through the Great Depression at this point in time. And the policy of the government up until now has been non-interventionist. And FDR comes in with plans to say that the government can help. The government can enact policies that will make your life better, that will help ease your suffering. And one of the ways, so what he wanted to do was to communicate to people that he heard he was hearing them. He heard their problems. He understood that they were suffering. He intended to help them. And these are the ways that he was going to help them. So this was a way to explain government's intentions and policies directly to the people, because you've got to get buy-in for them to work. It's also a way for him to go around, not go around so much, but to their factions of Congress, their factions of just the general population that are not agreeable to the idea of government intervention at this kind of level. And so it's a way for him to speak directly to the public, sell his ideas of what will work to them, and get them on board without the filter of it being heard through, say, your congressman was against the New Deal. So it's a way that he can generate buy-in, and he can combat negative stories of what he's doing, or a negative filter of what he's doing.
Thank you. Yeah, we all, and now we live in a time in which people directly communicate in various ways, and it's interesting to think about where this may have started. If you want to make the argument with these fireside chats. All right, so we've got conversations with the public through the press. We've got modeling potential policy changes and everyday life changes. We've got directly directing policy changes, and we've got communicating directly with the public. And for our last artifact, I'm going to ask you the same questions. What are we seeing here? What does this make you think about? And then what do you wonder about this right to petition cane?
This is an ivory cane, and it was given to President John Quincy Adams after he was president. When he was retired, people, it's not just Jimmy Carter building Habitat for Humanity houses. John Quincy Adams was reelected, or rather elected, by the people of Massachusetts to serve in Congress. And he became the lion of Congress and a thorn in the side to the pro-slavery faction in Congress. And he was given this cane for his work to repeal something called the gag rule. And the gag rule meant was enacted by Congress to say that they did not have to listen to any of the petitions that came from American citizens protesting against slavery and looking for the abolition of slavery. They didn't even have to read them. They could just shelve them, put them to one side, gag the public. And he believed that his job was to be a champion of the public, and their voices deserved to be heard. And every year he fought against the gag rule. This is in the 1830s, and it was finally abolished in 1844. And that cane was given to him for his support of the gag rule, or rather his work against the gag rule before it was abolished. And so he had engraved on it the date that it was abolished. And being John Quincy Adams, he felt that he couldn't keep it himself, that kind of gift. And so he gave it to the United States government. And it was put on display in the patent office. And one of the stories is that he used to go and visit it every now and again, which I love, the idea that presidents know that they shouldn't have a great ego, but they're human. So they want to go see that you liked them and that you admired what they did.
That's funny. Yeah, because I would imagine, I don't know, like in today's context, if this was in an exhibit, John Quincy Adams just sort of standing behind visitors and like hearing what they're talking about. All right. Well, Lisa Kathleen, thank you very much for sharing these stories with us and for helping us think about the different ways that the president is charged with working with the public of the United States. And we'll bring you back a little bit to have a final wrap up. But thank you for now, Lisa Kathleen. All right, Eden, we're going to transition now to our next section where we're going to ask our next museum expert some questions about a particular artifact that they issued to us through our newsletter. So I'm going to ask two things. One, does anyone have any questions not here that we can ask? And secondly, can you please put the information for the newsletter on here so that folks can let us know what questions they have for our next Social Studies Online?
Sure. No questions have come in yet. I do encourage everyone to take full advantage of the comment / chat box. And I do want to share a little bit about our Learning Commons newsletter. I will drop that link in the chat box. And It's a newsletter where you can be notified with the newest educational resources, lesson plans, activities, and opportunities like submitting questions to our curators. So I believe we presented 2 objects to the people, asked them what they wanted to know more about, and the votes came in. And so I'm excited to hear which object was chosen. Let me bring in our guest for today.
Thank you, Eden. And the people spoke, and they wanted to know about this. And we brought Bethany in, who's going to help us have a conversation about this particular artifact. Bethany, can you please introduce yourself to folks joining us? Please let us know a little bit about what you do at the museum, some of the projects that you're working on.
Sure. So I am Bethany Bemis, and I am a museum specialist in the political history division. So I mostly work with the collection, making sure that it's taken care of, both its stories and its physical objects. Currently, I am actually working on a new exhibition that'll go up in a few years about the relationship between Disney World and the national narrative and American citizenship. So give it a few years. Yeah.
Okay. All right. But in the interim, if y'all have any questions about all things Mickey, sign up for that newsletter, and Bethany is going to be your point person. Okay.
Happy to.
All right. So we have a few questions about this. And first of all, I'm going to ask Bethany, can you explain what this is? And then I'll present the questions that we gathered by email.
Sure. So this is known as the nuclear football. This one in particular comes from the Clinton administration. And during that administration, it would have held paperwork about how to launch a nuclear attack. People during that administration kind of referred to it as like a Denny's menu of options the president had, like pick one from column A and one from column B. And it was intended for use if another country had issued a threat against the United States and the president needed to respond very quickly. And so someone near the president would be carrying this. This very secure strap would be wrapped around their arm there. And in the case that it needed to be used, they would be able to open it. The president would be able to read the documents. And then if the president needed to issue a nuclear order, they would have to verify their identity with the Secretary of Defense. So it's kind of both an instrument of power and an instrument of checks and balances for our nuclear system.
Okay, and that leads us actually to one of our first questions that we had from our subscribers, which is, how does this thing work, right? Like, we imagine that there's like a button that the president presses to launch some sort of nuclear warhead, but is that how it works? What is the actual functionality? You tied this or introduce us a little bit with this call that the president had to make. Could you say a little bit more about how it actually works?
Yeah, so basically it's full of paperwork as far as we know. We don't know exactly what's inside, They do like to keep things a little bit secret. But the president basically needs to be able to make a rapid decision if the United States is under threat. And they need a bullet point list. Here are the things you can do. So with this briefcase, they're able to access those documents that tell them exactly what their options are. And they are able to communicate with the Secretary of Defense, who is the individual who will actually issue the orders that need to be obeyed by the military in order to make, say, a counterstrike happen if it's necessary.
Okay. All right. Well, and another question that we have is, how did the museum come into possession of this Clinton era nuclear football?
Well, the short story is they asked for it. But the long story is that the show that Lisa Kathleen referenced a while ago, The American Presidency, has a section on roles and responsibilities of the president. And one of them is that they're the head of the military. And our curators were looking for a way to represent the modern president being the head of the military, given that they don't walk around with like a ceremonial saber or anything on their hip. And they thought this, which at the time was still a pretty well-known, no one knows exactly what's in it, but it's always sort of pictured by the president. So it's not a secret that it exists. Mm-hmm. And they thought this would be something that they could represent that power with. And they ended up talking to the Secret Service and people at the White House. And after fully emptying it and rendering it inoperable, so we can't open it, even though there's nothing in there, they allowed us to have this one because they were retiring it and getting a new one.
So that quick note, and then that actually leads us to our last question that we received, or that we have time for today. I will definitely say that that was a great decision in terms of this symbolizing power, because I can say without a doubt that if someone walked into a room with an unmarked suitcase and just slammed it on the table, I'd immediately be like, what is going on? So great choice. And our last question is, where did this idea come from? How did it originate to call it the nuclear football, and to have this case here for us, or for the presidency, I'm sorry.
So the briefcase being carried with the president actually started during the Eisenhower administration, when he was sort of traveling, particularly internationally. He felt like he needed to have access to documents that he might need to use. It wasn't necessarily nuclear paperwork. It was things like presidential proclamations or other official paperwork he might need. And he passed that tradition down to John F. Kennedy. And during the Cuban Missile Crisis, Kennedy really realized that between him and the Russian government, there were two men who could essentially destroy the world at any given time. And he thought that was a lot of power for one person to hold. And so he thought that this, while allowing him access to what he would need immediately, also put a little bit of a check on that power, because he would have to use a special code that's issued to every president to verify his identity. So, you know, there's no sort of Liam Neeson character out there saying, yeah, I'm the president, go ahead, like send the missile. You have to actually prove you are who you say you are. So since the Kennedy administration, known as the nuclear football. And about why it's known as the football is that the sort of decision to sort of put some more security around our nuclear power was known as Operation Dropkick. I don't know a lot about football, but I do know that to issue a dropkick, you need a football.
Yeah, you do.
Oh, yeah. So this is actually, the football plays a role in Operation Dropkick, which is no longer active, but this is still known as the football.
Very cool. Thank you, Bethany. Now, as we start winding down our time together here, we do want to have a very brief conversation about the other option. So the other option was a cake. And so we did want to talk about why cakes very quickly, and how those end up as part of our collections, or how they signify the presidency in one way or another. So as this image pulls up here, Bethany, can you say a little bit about cakes and why cakes? And how do we keep them?
Yeah. Well, so what you're seeing is actually wedding cake from Linda Bird Johnson, the eldest daughter of Lyndon Johnson. She was married in the White House during his presidency. And she and Tricia Nixon, who is the next sort of in line to get married in the White House at that time, they all had their cakes boxed up in small favor boxes and given out to guests. And one of the guests was the National Museum of American History. Obviously, we weren't there, but they sent us a press packet to sort of document their wedding. And, you know, it kind of goes full circle back to the way Lisa Kathleen is thinking about the presidency interacting with the people. You know, my favorite part of a wedding is the cake. I mean, I like people, I like happiness, but I like sharing the cake. And that is a moment where, you know, it's a ritual where we all share in something to mark a celebration. And by sending the National Museum of American History a piece of the cake, it's sort of like they were inviting all of America into their wedding to be part of the celebration. And as for how we keep it, well, you can see that we haven't really unwrapped it. Basically, I wasn't around when it came in 67, but I haven't seen any documented evidence that we did anything other than let it dry out.
Okay. Okay.
No, you know, liquid or anything to attract insects.
Okay. No, it's a really nice way to think about like the invitation of the, you know, all of the American public to the wedding by inviting American history. And also a reminder that these folks have families and lives, right? You know, they happen to hold this very powerful office, but as we saw with the whole Biden crew last night, right? And with the Trump family before that families are in and around these administrations all the time. All right, we're gonna bring Lisa Kathleen here for one final question on our way out, because yesterday was the inauguration of a new administration, and you know, history, or the study of history, is the study of change over time. And we have marked different ways in which, the presidency and the way that the president relates to the public has changed over time with our collections today. The last question that we have is, what are some ways that you all are looking to see how the presidency changes with this new administration that's coming in?
Well, all presidencies, you run for president in the environment, the environment of the moment. So you looking at that and looking at the past, you know what it is that you want to change. You know what it is that you want to do when you were president. And as you are, the world will happen, and you will carry out some of the things you set out to do, and then you will modify some, and new things will be added because circumstances will change. So what we do is we start to document through the election and the campaign what you said you wanted to do, how the country responded to it, and then we watch what it is that you change, what it is that you do, what it is that you add or subtract, and how the country responds to that, and how it affects other government agencies and the lives of everyone in the United States and around the world. And that's what we start thinking about. How best do we show that? Do we show it through an stand? Do we show it through cake? Bring that into the museum.
Thank you, Lisa Kathleen. Bethany?
I think it will be interesting, both in terms of how we decide to document it and how it changes, how the president's communication with the public changes, right? So Lisa Kathleen showed us the fireside chat microphone. The Trump administration really was the first to extensively use Twitter as a way to communicate. We haven't really seen exactly what, we know that in the past, Biden's style has been very in person, but as Lisa Kathleen said, that may not be an option for them this time based on world circumstances. So I'm interested to see how it changes and then how we can show those changes over time.
Thank you. All right, everybody. Thank you for your time with us, and for folks viewing either now or later on. Sorry for going a little bit over time. These were very interesting artifacts, and we had interesting questions. But I'm gonna turn it back over to Eden, who will wrap up our time together and let us know what's coming up next.
Sure. So in the comment box is the links for all of the resources we mentioned today. Please join us next time for Black History Month on February 4th at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. All of our Social Studies Online episodes are archived, so you can come back and rewatch anytime at the same link. And thank you to our hosts and our guests, and thank you to all of you for spending your morning with us. We hope you're all staying safe and healthy. Bye.